Prison guards of Reddit, what is the most extreme thing you ever saw happen in your prison? One of my former teachers used to provide mental health services in the county jail. She said the worst thing she saw was an inmate who went insane. He was quiet and polite, and doing a small amount of time for a minor crime. But then, he got in one small fight and was moved to max, and something in him snapped. He decompensated so quickly that by day 4, he was smearing feces on the wall and singing nursery rhymes. He was taken away by ambulance and was never seen again. My dad was in prison and the craziest day he experienced was sometime around the end of his first week in. He had been keeping his head down, but one of the other inmates told him to meet him outside by the corner of one of the building during their free time outside. He was hesitant because he didn't want to get into trouble right out of the gate. He looked toward the corner of the building and saw a small group of guys huddled and he got even more concerned. Just as he was going to walk away they noticed him and called him over. He accepted. These guys were passing around a cantaloupe and sharing it. Each guy had a spoon and they'd take a bite and pass it on. A family member and I used to work at the same prison and the prisoners knew we were related. My family member got into a minor car accident and had a few weeks off work to recover. Word got out about it to all the prisoners, and I constantly got asked how I was coping because they all heard it was super serious. It wasn't. While one was asking me what happened when we had a lockdown code so everyone had to go back to their blocks. Came to find out in the incident report that a fight had started because two prisoners heard two different stories on what happened to my family member, couldn't agree, started a punch-up and got the whole block of about 80 guys brawling. Whole place got locked down for like 10 hours. All because my family member can't drive. This is taking the word extreme to a different level, but when I was a prison guard, female working in a men's max, I worked in the kitchen. I tried to be firm, fair and consistent and it worked. I went home whole every night. Somehow a few of the prisoners found out it was my birthday and towards the middle of my shift they had me come around the office, and there on the table was a 4-layer industrial-sized cake with pink frosting. I was touched. They told me to get my piece before everyone else did, and not even 10 minutes later it was gone. Not a guard but a prison nurse. Had to respond to a cell fight where one man bit off another man's nose. The most extreme one I heard though was from a doctor I worked with. My first patient ate her own eyeball. I did a bit in Florida about 4 years ago. While I was inside, they let my cell block come into the common area to watch the iHeartRadio Awards. Never would have watched it on my own, but it was nice to have the distraction. This was the summer that Ariana Grande had that One Less Problem song, and she performed it right before J-Lo came to the stage. Now, I'm in with mostly Puerto Rican inmates, so J-Lo being on was a big goddamn deal. Some dude just loses his mind during the Ariana Grande song, some of the dudes said he was into little girls or something, and throws a very lightweight plastic chair at the TV. Didn't think it would do much damage, but it busted the LCD. Hell broke loose. Dudes weren't gonna get a chance to see J-Lo's butt, and they wanted blood for it. I ran my gringo behind back to my cell, and a 60-man brawl ensued. All of this to say, in the midst of the insanity, one guy bit another guy's thumb off. And swallowed it. Not mine but my dad's. First day he was there a riot occurred because some dumb prisoner thought it would be funny if he stole a book from a prisoner and blamed it on someone else. Long story short, the guy who was blamed had all 4 of his limbs broken and his face beaten to a pulp. Apparently they already had beef between them. Via my father, one prisoner was trying to kill his cellmate, but didn't have a weapon. So he took a pen, stuck it in the guy's ear and stomped on it. It came out of the victim's mouth. My dad was a P officer in the prison service for a couple decades. He has a few stories. One that I always remember was there was this one kid who was about 16 but he was about 6 feet 4 inches and built like a tank. He also had a bit of a temper. One day when my dad is supervising the gym workout he looks over towards the benches and this kid picks up a 34 kilograms dumbbell, lifts it above his head and starts to swing it down onto another inmate's head who is laying on one of the benches. My dad manages to sprint over, grab this kid and pin him against the wall, just in time to stop him from killing the other inmate. At this point my dad is thinking, if this kid wants to fight, he is probably going to win. But luckily he had a good reputation, so the kid didn't fight, but also other inmates alerted other guards. If he was able to carry through with that swing, that inmate's head would literally have exploded. There is no other outcome to that. It was straight up attempted murder. Nothing ended up happening with the kid. The prison head didn't deem it to be much of an issue because no one was hurt, so my dad brought the 34 kilograms dumbbell into the meeting to show her. She didn't care, ignored it because it makes her prison look better on paper. I was just an inmate, but when I was locked up in the Bronx, I remember people making shivs out of the toothbrushes we were given. Also, one guy screamed bloody murder to prove that the COs didn't give a crap about what went on in the holding cells. No one checked on us. Also, the COs would purposely throw rival gang members into the same cell. I'll never forget some of their screams as they got hauled off into enemy territory. Edit. Also saw people get beat by the COs and pepper sprayed in the face while incapacitated. Then left in handcuffs for hours so they couldn't wash the spray off. Their screams were pretty bad too. One dude had a seizure and it took about an hour for a medical response. AMA, I don't really get to talk about this experience in real life. An inmate with mental issues and HIV sliced his stomach open with a razor. Line was from below sternum to just below belly button. Survived, but man, it was ugly. Not me, but my mom is a prison nurse. She once had a dude swallow a balloon filled with drugs, and it popped or leaked in his stomach and he overdosed. I was a mailroom employee at the unit in Texas that houses death row. For security reasons, most of death row inmates had their mail constantly scanned or read, while other inmates just had them searched for contraband. This whole process was a knee-jerk process out in place after a governor was threatened from death row. Then bringing the mail to the inmates and telling them you read it and found some stuff was terrifying because they obviously never liked and often threatened violence. The stuff you read is pretty insane. I read plenty of neo-Nazi plots to help bring in the New World Order, stuff that was completely encoded in their own little systems, and all sorts of absolutely depressing stuff. The worst one I ever read had to have been the one of an inmate who was scheduled for execution the next day, and was sending a bunch of "FU" letters to the victim's family. As if they hadn't been through enough. Not a prison guard, but my good friend is. This happened a week ago. Two prisoners were shouting and eventually got into a fight, which led to a full-out riot. Where things got extreme was, they ripped a TV out of the wall to get to the electrical cables and frayed them. Then got bags of toilet papers and used the cables and toilet paper to create fireballs during the riot. Small fires were all over the place, as well as the classic shanks and bludgeoning weapons. Furthermore, all the prisoners used their pillowcases with eyes cut out, so they couldn't be identified and proven guilty for anything they did, which led to them really removing any inhibitions. They basically had a room full of the KKK going full riot, murdering each other and flinging fireballs. When the fire department arrived, they tried using the hose to get cellmates back into their cells, which somehow wasn't working. SWAT and pepperball officers were also brought in. I was watching from outside. It was quite spectacular. Not me, and not a prison guard, but one of my college professors used to teach at a prison. She was a Portuguese literature teacher for them. This happened in Brazil. She was teaching the inmates, all male, about poetry, and it was close to Mother's Day, so she told them to write a poem about their own mothers. This was in a very impoverished area, and she told us all the inmates were illiterate before she started with them. One of the inmates wrote a beautiful poem about his deceased mother, that was killed right before he was arrested when he was much younger. He was arrested for killing his father, who murdered his mom. All the inmates started clapping and whistling, because it was so beautiful and heartbreaking, but then the guards went nuts thinking they were messing around and started beating the inmates so they would be quiet. Classes were cancelled after that. My professor said it was all very shocking. It was a pure scene with people bonding and learning, and the guards resorted to violence without even thinking. She never went back to teach at a prison again. My dad was a prison guard in Tennessee. Every Thursday was pork chop day and Max. When you have nothing, you live for the little things. One day they ran out of pork chops, and a dumb guard tells the back of the line, "They're all out of pork chops, the rest of you guys are getting bologna." Minor riot with a 6-hour lockdown, 2 broken bones, and like 10 people had to be treated by the nurse. Not quite the same, but my aunt was a psychiatrist in a women's prison in the 70s. They had a change of warden from someone reasonably reasonable to someone who was extremely unreasonable. One of the things she instigated was a work program to help landscape a garden for the prison. Naturally, a number of the prisoners decided to sign up with the chance to be outside. However, it wasn't until after they'd signed up that they found out that it was replacing their usual rec time, meaning they had no breaks and more work. The warden was insistent that she have a flower garden for the prisoners to enjoy, as it would be calming. It just so happened to be facing her window. So diligently, the lady prisoners worked and planted flowers ready for the coming spring. So along comes spring, and during the time that the flowers had, well, flowered, the warden had been on a 2-week holiday. She came back to a lovely view from her office window. F off. Spelt in begonias, in 10-feet-high font. My dad worked at the Chino prison for years and told me a story. He was going around doing checks, and as he was leaving a hall, a prisoner called out to him, "Hey Smith," not his real name, and my dad asked him what. The inmate told him, "Come here." My dad, not wanting to deal with this, just says, "What? Just tell me." The inmate says, "Smith, I really need you to come here right now." My dad, a bit annoyed, goes over to him and says, "What?" The inmate then whispers to him, "You left your keys in that door, go get them now." My dad looks, and sure enough, he had left his keys in that door. He grabbed them and then gave the inmate a big thank you and slipped him a few packs of smokes. My dad says that inmates were typically good to him, because he always treated them fair and with respect, but always made sure they knew he was the one in charge.